So I may have done you guys a disservice a little bit. So recently, I've done a vlog for a trip out west, and I've got some other photos that I've posted on social media with stars and the galaxy and everything else. Part of it that I probably have been a bit remiss in providing you is the how I did that. So today I just want to go through the process of what I do with those photos after I've taken them. So I've explained several things in previous videos and also on my Instagram posts about, the MPF rule and how to take star photos and whatnot. And I've alluded to stacking in the past, but I've never really gone quite in depth with that process at all. My process has also changed a lot over the last couple of years or so. I want to give you some insight into what it is that I'm doing now, how I'm doing it, and kind of the whole process and the tools that I'm using to go through it. So one caveat to that is I'm doing this on a Mac, and I'm going to be showing you what I'm doing on the Mac with Mac utilities and Photoshop and whatnot. So the information in here is going to be accurate and can be cross-platform, but just so you know that all the visuals and a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are going to be Mac specific. So at the end of this video, I'm also going to show you some of the Windows utilities, or talk about some of the Windows utilities that you can use if you're not using a Mac in order to edit your photography. So that said, let's get started. The computer's up and ready to go. This is going to be an example of my process. If you do this slightly differently, make sure to sound off in the comments below. Let everybody know what it is that you're doing to process these photos and how your workflow might be different. That way, maybe everybody can get an opportunity to evaluate different ways of doing things. All right, so to start the process off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some examples of images that I have taken recently in Maine. This is just a small subset of the images that were taken up there, so that way you can kind of see the process of where I go through. So I'm going to take some of these raw files to start with and go through step by step what each stage of the game is going to be. Just so you know, the tools that I'm using are going to be Adobe Photoshop, the current version with Camera Raw, and I'm also going to be using Starry Sky Stacker in order to stack together the photos, and then everything is going to be brought into Photoshop later on. So just to get started with, we're going to open everything up in Adobe Photoshop so that way everything can come into Camera Raw in order to process each of the photos. Like I said, I only have a small subset of photos here, so the first thing I'm doing is just making some initial adjustments to one of the photos so that way I can get the exposure, contrast, and any adjustments that I might make to the sky during the process. So the editing of the image is going to be pretty straightforward at this point. I'm just making sure that I have my white point, my black points set correctly. Make sure that temperature is also set correctly, contrast and everything. Like I said, make sure that the exposure is what it is that I'm looking for in order to stack all these photos together. Obviously, some temperature is going to change because you don't want it to be too blue. You want the sky to look as natural as possible. So, when it's too blue or too vibrantly blue, it doesn't quite look real. But also, when you cool off the photo a little bit, that will also bring some of the colors of the galactic center out for you as well. So from there, I'm just going to copy all the settings and then paste it into all the other images, because all the other images are going to be of very similar exposure to the initial one. Now, the reason why it is that I go through and do the Camera Raw first is so that way I can export these files and these photos into a TIFF, so that way I have a finished exposure or a finished correction for the image to be stacked. So the last thing that I'm going to do as I go through this, I will do a spot check of the photos that I have edited just to make sure that there's no outliers. From there, I go up into the upper right hand corner and then I choose to export the photos. In this case, I'm saving them in the same location because it's just an example set. I save them as TIFF files so that way they're not as compressed as you would find in a JPEG. Does cause larger files, but like I said, this way you get a less compressed image or an uncompressed image in order to stack together. And this is going to become important a little bit later on, why I do this first, but this is an important first step. So what I'm going to do now is, these are the files that I had originally, processed in order to put together the stack. As you can see, there's about 120 or so images that are in there. From this point, I fire up Starry Landscape Stacker and make sure that I select all of the images that I want into the stack. And I've already, compensated for light frames, dark frames, and everything. So this is now going to process all of those images, and we'll just sit and wait for that to complete in order to put it together. So now that the images have finished processing and stacking together, the initial stack of images is going to look kind of blurry because all of those images are composited together into one image. So we get kind of that ghostly motion look, which I think personally is actually a pretty cool look as well. But for right now, we got to start considering what is going to be our sky, what is going to be the landscape. So it starts off by, you add, red dots to the sky in order to help mask that out. From there, it creates a mask. And if you need to refine it, as you can see that there's some areas in this that are not masked out. So I just go through and mask them all out, make sure that everything is complete. So that way the sky is completely identified in order to stack together the sky separate from the actual ground or landscape. And you can get as, fine grained with this as you want, or not. This was just a pretty quick, gross, scroll through of the different, the different masks. I did refine it a little bit for this example. So once you're done with that, you can select an image that you're going to align with. So if you want if you've done several hours of photos together, if you want the galactic center or the Milky Way to be in a specific position that is shown in some of the photos, you can do that. You can also exclude certain images as well. So, but from that point, we're just going to do the standard. All you're going to do right at this point is just align and composite. Let the application do its work. It's going to sit here and process again like it did when it brought in the photos. So now we just wait. So now that it's finished compositing all the images, you're going to get your initial look at your stack. And as you can see, the colors are standing out. You're getting a lot more stars in there. You can show and hide your mask just to make sure that everything is masked out properly. And from there, you can also change some of your initial. You can change some of the initial settings for, contrast and brightness and whatnot. If you want to brighten up the sky, brighten up your image, or, create a more contrasty type image or whatever. But you can do some quick basic adjustments to your image from here. From there, you have a couple of options that you can choose for the export. Basically, you're looking to either min-max, mean, your values. Generally, you want to stick with your mean because a mean the mean of all the photos stacked together will help reduce the amount of noise, because that way if you scroll into it a little bit, you can see that there's really not that much noise in your image, and your stars are pretty sharp at this point. So at that point, you just save your image, make sure that it's exported into whatever folder that you're working from, or in an area that you can easily access it to bring into Photoshop. So as you can see, I also got two images the out of the export, because one gives me the fully stacked image and the other one gives me a stacked image with the mask. So that way the ground is masked out. And this is going to be really important in a little while as well. Again, I know I keep giving you some, this is going to be important soon, but trust me, it'll all come together here near the end. So once you're all set with that, you can close out those files. So another thing to note is when you process your TIFF images and you put them all together, each individual TIFF image is going to have all of the noise still in it because you haven't stacked them all together at this point. So when you zoom into these images, as you can see, there's a lot of noise in our foreground, a lot of noise in the ground area of this, because with all the images not stacked together, it hasn't been able to eliminate some of that noise for you at that point. So as you can see, this is a really noisy photo. I believe I took all of these at an ISO of 3200 or 6400. So the noise is going to be present in these images when you go through them all. We're going to correct for these as we start stacking all of them together, because at this point we're now going to enter Photoshop in order to start putting together the images that we need for the final photo. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to load up a bunch of layers. This is where we go back in and we're going to restack all of our images and go through. We're going to go through and take all of the original TIFF images that we had stacked up through Starry Landscape Stacker. We're going to import them into Photoshop. So we're going to import them into Photoshop. We're going to automatically align all of the layers and create a smart object of all of these layers. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take all of those images and we're going to squash them together into one smart object in Photoshop to do some more work. So at this point, while Photoshop is working and stacking all of those images together, I suggest that you can sit back, relax, take a moment, maybe go get a cup of coffee and relax, get a snack, whichever, because this process is going to take a few minutes for all of the images to come together. Like I said, I've got about 120 images, so this doesn't take too terribly long, but it is a process for all of the images to be brought into Photoshop and then stacked together as a smart object. Because the last thing that it's going to do is do all of the alignments, all of the automatic stacking and everything in order to create that one singular smart object for you. So now all of the images are stacked together and you have that one singular layer in Photoshop, and that is your smart object. And that's going to include all of the images going into this. And as you can see, things are a little bit skewed because of the layering and alignment of those layers in order to bring it all together for you. So as you can see, all of the noise and everything is still there in the image with this all stacked together. So what you're going to do is you're going to come up and go to Layer and then Smart Objects and then the Stack mode. And again, like I said, with the Starry Landscape Stacker, I selected Mean for all of the images to be stacked together. So I'm going to do the same here for the Smart Object for all of these images stacked together. Again, this takes a few moments to process, and just to keep in mind that the more images that you have in your stack and in your smart object, the longer that this process is going to take. So now that it's done processing and put everything together as mean, again, you've got a little bit of that streakiness happening in the sky, but when we start to look at our foreground and our ground areas, a lot of that noise has been eliminated. So that's the reason for putting it into a smart object and doing the stacking mode of mean, because by using the mean, it's taking the mean average of all of those images together to help reduce the noise out of the image. So at this point, all we're going to do is we're going to come back, we're going to open the second image, so that way we take our fully stacked image with the mask, pull that out of Photoshop so that way we have the image, both images side by side. We use our selection tool, we grab that from the other one, and we bring it into our stacked image with the smart object and then line up the layers in order to make sure that the mask and the ground and everything kind of match up. We could also clean this up with another layer mask and everything, but at least for right now we can get the main part of the stack put together with the ground to keep all the pieces together, or to get all the pieces together in order to have an image that is stacked with the least noise possible. So again, like I said, we can create another layer mask and then go through and just mask out portions of the image in order to help clean up the margins between them. So you do this with some feathering, and that way you can bring out some of the details near the horizon there that you might have lost in the stack, or might have a better rendering of in the smart object, what have you. But at this point, this is where you start to put together all of those pieces into your final image. At this point, I'll zoom out, take a look, at least give it a nice good, long view of it, so that way I can just finish kind of grossly masking out the ground, making sure that there's no artifacts or anything from the Starry Landscape Stacker stack coming into the image. After that, come through, I'll do a crop on it, make sure that everything is cropped in the way I want it to be. That'll also help get rid of some of those gross angular edges that came from the smart stack. and then put it all together and aligned in such a way that creates that interesting image. Once you have it all cropped together, now you have basically your final image kind of stacked up together and in the right place. So the last thing I'll do from there is more adjustments to the image for hue and saturation, maybe some exposure, help bring out some details or maybe subdue some details. So that way I can make sure that the image looks as natural as possible for that final image once it's exported. From this point, what I'll do is I'll save the image. Now, one thing to keep in mind that when you have your smart object of a whole bunch of photos put together and then your other stacked image from Starry Landscape Stacker all thrown together, when you're trying to save this, what ends up happening is you get a very, very large file. Once it gets beyond 4 gigabit or 4 gigabytes, what ends up happening is it wants to save as a PSB file rather than a TIFF. So you have that option to save as that PSB file. It's going to be a very, very large file at that point, which might be a little bit hard to manage. So one of the things that I'll tend to do with this, it's not one of my favorite things to do, but what I'll do is I'll then flatten the image and basically take all of those images and squish them all together into one layer and then save that as the TIFF image. So that way I have a final image that I can manipulate and resize and export into a JPEG or what have you for printing or putting on the internet or social media or whatnot. It tends to be a little bit easier to manage the file at that point, but I usually do save that PSB file so that way I have a working file in the future. So that's going to be stacking up your images and putting it all together into a final image for posting and printing and everything using Photoshop and Deep Sky Stacker. Like I said, if you've made it this far, thank you very much for sticking with me on this. I know this has been a bit long-winded, but I also did promise you some Windows applications that you could use if you're not a Mac user. There's two applications that I have seen out there that are pretty well reviewed, and I've actually been recently, within the last year or two, recommended by Telescope Company in the Northeast for specifically for stacking for stars in the sky and the deep sky objects. The first one, and these are for Windows. Obviously, Windows computers. The first one is Deep Sky Stacker. I've actually seen this one in use, and it does work pretty well. The other one is going to be Sequator or Sequitur. I don't know. Maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's both of these applications are free programs that you can use in order to stack your stars for photos much like this. So just to wrap it all up, thank you very much for coming along with me on this. I really do appreciate everybody's support. Make sure to give this a like, share it with your friends, and I hope you've enjoyed it. But also make sure to get out there, take some great photos, and I'll see you again next time.